Back to our big breaking news. The Supreme Court just upheld a law that could effectively ban TikTok in the United States. The justices ruled unanimously that the ban does not violate First Amendment rights in upholding Congress's ban. The justices admitted that TikTok is no doubt a distinctive and expansive outlet for expression, but said that lawmakers' concerns for national security regarding the app's data collection practices is enough to keep the ban in place. We're going to go into much more detail with this with Elizabeth Schulze coming up in just a few minutes.
Yes, so many questions, but let's go into our other breaking story of the morning. Israel's security cabinet has recommended approval of a ceasefire deal.
Yeah, the agreement would pause the 15-month war with Hamas in Gaza and releases dozens of hostages held by militants there, including Americans.
Yeah, the deal now goes to the full cabinet of ministers for the final sign-off. If approved, hostages could be released as early as Sunday.
Joining us now live from Jerusalem with more is ABC's Tom Soufi Burridge. Tom, so good to have you and your perspective, especially with all this breaking news that's happening. So if you could break it down for us once again, what are the key components of this ceasefire agreement and how likely is this to hold? Because we know who our final holdouts were, Netanyahu's far-right coalition. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's pretty likely to hold now. I mean, look, the politics is going through the motions, guys. In terms of the key components, we're talking about phase one of a very complicated deal. It basically would mean a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza. It would mean 33 hostages released by Hamas. Most of those hostages are thought to be alive. It would include, we believe, 2 Americans who are thought to be alive, Keith Siegel in his 60s and Sagi Dechelchen in his 30s. And look, it would also involved the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails and also the withdrawal of Israeli troops from most of the Gaza Strip. But we believe Israeli troops will, for at least the first phase of this deal, remain in that key strip of land in southern Gaza on the border with Egypt. And then once this deal is in motion, once the first hostages, 3 of them we believe will be released on Sunday, then negotiations can begin to try and turn this into phases 2 and 3 of the deal and a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the remaining hostages.
So a phase in the release of those hostages. How significant a role did the moderators play in this, Qatar, the United States, in getting this done?
A very key role. I mean, look, you know, the Biden administration has been working on this for months. I've been here in Israel reporting months ago about a very similar deal, which was on the table, and ultimately the 2 sides didn't come together and didn't make the concessions they ultimately did. Look, President-elect Donald Trump's team definitely had an impact. Hamas was weakened, though, over the last few months with events elsewhere in the Middle East, more isolated with, you know, Hezbollah greatly decimated by Israel's military campaign against them in Lebanon. So there were other factors at play, but yes, the mediators were absolutely key at really bringing concessions on both sides, not just Hamas, but ultimately the Israeli government has made important concessions this time around.
And potentially this could kick in as soon as Sunday, Tom. How prepared is Israel to implement the humanitarian side of this, all of those components, including the release of Palestinian prisoners and the return of the displaced Gazans? This is a massive humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, we're just getting word, actually, from the Israeli government that they have now published a very long list of Palestinian prisoners who would be released. The Israeli Security Cabinet just moments ago have signed off on this deal. The full Israeli government will now consider the deal tonight, and we expect them to sign off on it too. In terms of the humanitarian side, we know from Israel's health ministry that they are preparing 6 hospitals to receive hostages because, you know, last time around back in November and December of 2023, when, you know, about 100 hostages were released near the beginning of the war, many of those hostages spent a long time in hospital when they were released. And on the Palestinian side, yes, you know, the humanitarian situation in Gaza has been absolutely dire for months. A lack of food, a lack of medical supplies, many of the hospitals just simply not functioning. Much of the Gaza Strip absolutely obliterated by Israel's military campaign. So also in this deal is the idea that huge amounts of humanitarian aid should flood into Gaza. And yes, civilians, Palestinians, should be able to move more freely from south to north, potentially back to their homes or what's left of their homes.
We know heartbreak on both sides. And I want to know, you're in Jerusalem right now. What are you hearing? What are you seeing reaction from people there?
Look, I mean, I think there's mixed reaction over the last 24, 48 hours. We've spoken to many of the families of the hostages. They will believe the deal when it actually starts happening. So if on Sunday those first 3 hostages are actually out, that's the moment they'll actually know this is a reality, because there's been so many false dawns for them, so many moments of hope, which have all been dashed over the last few months. And there is skepticism. I think there's also anger that this didn't happen months ago. You know, you think about the family of Goldberg-Polin, an American citizen, his brave parents, Rachel and John. We've spoken to them at ABC many, many times. And look, you know, for them, this is bittersweet because they believe that their son could have been saved too. And there's also fear, guys, about whether or not this initial phase of the deal, this initial 6-week ceasefire, will really transition into a full-term ceasefire in Gaza, whether or not the two sides, Hamas and the Israeli government, are willing to make longer-term concessions to get the remaining hostages out. And many of the families linked to those hostages we've spoken to are skeptical and fearful that won't happen.
Tom, this is a truly complicated situation, but we really appreciate your insights. ABC's Tom Soufi Burridge reporting from Jerusalem. Thank you again.
Thank you.